So we'll continue with critical path analysis. So part of the ways in which you can calculate critical path analysis is using the EST, the earliest start time. What do we use the EST for? You know, when you're starting a project, you already have a network for that project. Each task has to be performed, and each task has its duration. So you use the EST to understand the time at which each task has to be performed. So yeah, it shows how soon a task of in a project can begin. So if this task, now you have a network on a project, task A, task B, task C, task D, and E, and F, and G. When are you going to start this task? The earliest possible time at which this task has to start for that project, because without this task completed, you don't even have a project. So the earliest start time means the earliest stage, the earliest time at which a project can start or the task can start. So the EST is the first stage in finding critical paths in the network, as it calculates the earliest time at which each of the tasks or activities can start. So task A, it has to start within the next few days. So it has to start in the next 3 days. So that means within the next 3 days, task A has to start. That's the EST. Then after the EST, we have the LFT, that's the latest finish times. So for the latest finish time, what does it imply? This is how when the project, the time at which you have, that if there's a delay within the project, within the task, it will not affect the project. That is the latest finish time. So here I wrote, the next step involves calculating the latest finish time that each task can finish without causing the project to be delayed. So this is the amount of time by which a task can be delayed without causing the project. So the latest finish time means, oh, there could be a delay in the task. If there's any delay in that task, how long can this delay be without it affecting the project? So if there's a delay, if there's going to be a delay from your own side, how long can that delay be without it affecting the time or the duration of that project? That is the latest finish time. Do you understand the latest finish time? Yeah. The earliest start time is how soon is the project can start? How soon is the project going to start? The latest finish time is that time at which the task, if there's going to be any delay, the least time at which, if there's going to be a delay that would not affect the project, that is the latest finish time. Is it clear? Yeah. So how do we calculate the latest finish time? It is LFT at node minus time taken to complete the previous task. So what I'm saying is, if there's going to be a delay in task B, if there's going to be a delay in task B, that means what is the latest finish time in task B minus the time taken to finish the process, the job of task A. Did you get it? Yeah. There's a task A before task B. So if we need to calculate the LFT for task B, how do we calculate the LFT for task B? We have to calculate it by saying the LFT at task B minus the time taken to finish task A. That will give you the LFT. That means if you have to know the time at which there will be a delay that would not affect the project, is for you to calculate the time, the LFT now, the node at task B minus the time it takes for task A. Maybe task A is going to take 7 days. So the LFT at node B is maybe 15 days. So 15 days minus the EST of task A, which is maybe 7. So that means for 8 days, there might be a delay. It's not going to affect the project. That is how you calculate it. Do you understand how to calculate it? Yes, sir. Do you understand how to calculate it now? LFT at node right now minus the time it takes to finish task A. And if it is task C, you have to check the LFT at node B. Now the LFT at node C minus the time taken to finish task B. That's how you calculate your LFT. Is it clear? Yes. Now we go to identifying the critical path. So I explained latest finish time, right? Yeah. Okay. So go to page 94. Identifying the critical path. So we already know what critical path analysis is. It's about the time it takes that whatever happens, if there's going to be a delay, the amount of time that if there's a delay that would affect the project, that is the critical path. So there must not be a delay. And how will you be able to be sure? How are you going to be sure about not having a delay that would affect a project? You need to analyze it. That is why we have the network analysis. So you give each task their timing so that each task has to manage its time. So, there's a time management. So task A has to finish within the next 5 days. Task B has to finish within the next 10 days. And without finishing task A, we can't do task B. Yeah. These are what we call network analysis. So you are trying to understand what the critical path analysis is. So here, for you to identify your critical path analysis, what do you have to do? You have to make a network. So with a network, you'll be able to analyze or identify your critical path. Without having a network, you won't be able to know the critical path. Do you get what I'm saying here? Yeah. We need to know the critical path. Why do we have to know? So that we know the time at which, if care is not taken, there's going to be a delay on the project. So each time that each task has to be performed, so that there won't be delay in the project. That is why we have the task. So these tasks, we have to put them together. That makes the network. So for us to identify the critical path, we need what? We need the networking. So the network, the task, each task comprises, when you put the tasks together, we have the network. So to identify the critical path, we need the network. So with the help of the network, it helps us to identify the critical path. So what is it? So the critical path of any network, where the earliest start time and the latest finish time are the same. So now that we have understood the EST and the LFT, how do we use it to understand the critical path? We use it this way. So we understand when your critical path, to identify your critical path, what you have to do is that where you have your EST equals to your LFT, that is the critical path. So if your EST is 8 days and your LFT is 8 days, that means it's a critical path. Because it means that you should not delay within those days. If you delay, then the project will be delayed. Do you understand what critical path analysis is then? Yeah. Okay. So after with the critical path analysis, we have the float. What is the float? Here I wrote. The float is the amount of time which a task can be delayed without affecting the project. So a task can be delayed. Yes, we talked about that when we're talking about the LFT. If this task is delayed, what amount of time can we delay this task? The amount of time that we can delay this task, that it will not affect the project, is what we call the float. That's what the float is now. The amount of time at which, if this project is delayed, it will not affect, if this task is delayed, it will not affect the project. That is our float. Any question about float? No. Then how do we calculate our total float? To calculate our total float, it is the LFT of activity minus EST of activity minus duration. The LFT of activity, that means the latest finish time of each task, minus the earliest start time of each task, minus the duration, the total time at which you have to finish the project. That's how you calculate your total float. Do you understand how to calculate your total float now? Yeah. The LFT of task minus the EST of the task minus the duration of that task. Oh, it's going to take 20 days to finish this project. So that means the LFT minus the EST, the LFT minus the EST minus your duration will give you your total float. Is it clear? Yeah. Then we have the free float. For the free float, what does the free float mean? I said it is the amount at which the time which a task can be delayed without affecting the following task. So when we talk about free float, it's different from the float. The float is all about the time at which a task can be delayed without affecting the project. Are you with me? Yes. That is the total float. But when we talk about the free float, we're talking about the time at which a task can be delayed without it affecting the subsequent task. That means the following task. So if this task can be delayed for 5 days. It means if you are delaying this task for 5 days, it will not affect, if task A, task B can be delayed, if task B is delayed for 5 days, it will not affect task C. That is what we call free float. Do you understand it? So the amount of time it takes that a delay of this task would not affect the subsequent task is what we call the free float. So I wrote it, I wrote, this is the amount of time which a task can be delayed without affecting the following task. For free float, we're talking about the following task. For float, we're talking about the project. I think get the difference here.
Yeah.
Free float, we are talking about the task. For float, we're talking about the project. Any question about that?
No.
So free float is EST start of next task minus EST of this task minus duration. The earliest start time of the subsequent task minus the earliest start time of this task that you want to delay minus the duration. Do you get it?
Yeah.
We have task B. There's going to be a delay in task B. But how long can we delay task B that it will not affect task C? That is free float. How long is this task B? Can we delay it that it will not affect task C? That is free float. So how do you calculate it? Task EST of task B minus EST of task C minus the duration of the project. Do you get it? Do you get the formula or not?
No.
We have task A, B, and C. So let's say there's going to be a delay. We want to check the critical path of task B. So to check it, we want to check the float, the free float of task B. So to check the free float of task B, it means we want to calculate the amount of time at which, if we delay task B, it will not affect task C. That is the free float. So how do you calculate this, the free float? It is the EST of task B that we are checking the amount of the time that we can delay it, okay, minus the EST of task C, that is the subsequent task of B. Subsequent task of B is task C. Yes or no? Yes. So the EST of task B minus the EST of task C minus the duration of the project. Okay. That will give us the free float. Do you get it? Yeah. When you're talking about the total float, it is the LFT of task, this task. We want to check the float, the total float of task B. It will be the LFT of task B minus the EST of task B minus the duration. That is for float. We want to calculate the total float of task B. To calculate the total float of task B, it will be the earliest start time, the latest finish time of task B minus the earliest start time of task B minus the duration of the entire project. That is when you want to calculate the total float of task B. But if you are calculating the free float of task B, it will be the earliest start time of task B minus the earliest start time of the subsequent task, which is task C, minus the duration of the project. Is it clear? Do you have any question about that? Then we go to the limitations now of critical path analysis. We already talked about the advantages of critical path analysis, right? It helps us to manage our time. It is useful for networking. We talked about it. It allows you to allocate resources as at when due. Yeah, do you remember that? Yeah. Now, what are the problems we encounter when there's critical, when we use this method? Number one, information used to estimate times in the network may be incorrect. You are using critical path analysis. You are using information. You are using an estimate. Sometimes estimate might be over and it might also be under. If it is under, it affects the project. If it is over, it also affects the project. Yeah. So this is one of the problems you face when you are using critical path analysis. So the estimate you are using might not be correct. Two, information used to estimate times in the network. Okay, we talked about that. Two, changes is the only constant thing. Therefore, changes sometimes occur during the lifetime of a project. it's a project. The only thing that is constant in life, the only constant thing in life is changes. So that means during the life of that project, different changes might occur. Economic external factors could affect the project, but you wouldn't have put it into consideration when you are making your critical path analysis. Do you get what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
You've checked about the delay of the project. You've checked about the duration of the project. What about things that could happen, things that could affect the project? Maybe the source of finance for the project stopped. Maybe there's war. Maybe anything could happen during the course of that project, which might affect the project. Do you understand? So that's the second problem about critical path analysis. You won't put into consideration the changes that might occur during the life of the project. Is it clear?
Yeah.
The third problem about critical path analysis is the time taking. It's a network. You are putting networks together. You are putting tasks. You are taking task A, task B, different tasks. You're putting them together to prepare to make a network. It takes time to bring up a network. So that means you might waste more time putting up this network. That's another problem. So yeah, I wrote, although critical path analysis identifies times when resources might be used somewhere else in the business, but the problem is that it takes time to put network analysis together. It takes time. The fourth one, network analysis may be difficult, especially for large projects. For projects like, let's say, building a skyscraper. When you're building a skyscraper, you need hundreds of thousands of tasks.
Yeah.
Yes or no? Yeah. So, and you need all these tasks to be put together for a network. It becomes so complex.
Yeah.
Because it's a large project, not just a mini project.
Yeah.
So it has a lot of tasks to put together. Yeah. The only way out is maybe you try to use a computer to make the approach simpler. But when you have to put a network on a large project together, it takes a whole lot of time. It might even become so complex for you to do. Yeah. Because all these tasks has to be put in order. When you're talking about a network is not just putting task A, task C, task D. No, it has to be in order. Task A has to finish in 3 days before going to task B. Oh, task B and task C can be done at the same time, but task D will not be done without finishing task B or task C. So that means you have to put them in order, like A, B, C, D, E, F. So when you have to put a large project into different tasks, before you now combine them in order, it takes time and it becomes more complex.
Yeah.
Do you have any question about critical path analysis?
No.
So that's all about critical path analysis. I think it's clear.
Yes, sir.
So you use critical path analysis to do what? To calculate the time you need to use to finish up a project. Yeah. And whenever there's going to be a delay, you try to use your network analysis to understand the kind of delay that it would be. Any question?
No, sir.
Why? Yes, please.